Hi there, I'm Jack O'Neill and I'm with Gavin Weiler, and today we're going to talk about the physics and biomechanics behind a back handspring transitioning into a back aerial on a balance beam. First, we're going to talk about the background and history of what a balance beam is. The balance beam, or beam, is a specific event within gymnastics. It originally started simply as dance routines on the beam, and then it turned into more acrobatic routines. Women were first awarded individual Olympic medals in the event in 1952 Olympic Games. Prior to today, some balance beams were known to be long as 20 meters, but today's standard measurements are that they are 5 meters long, 10 centimeters high, and 125 centimeters above the floor. Today's routines include both dance and aerial parts, with holds throughout so that the judges can give their scores.
Now I'm going to be talking to you about the specific movement. So there's many different moves that you can perform on a balance beam. There's cartwheels, backflips, somersaults, vaults, and plenty more. But what we're looking at is the back handspring transition to a back aerial. So what is a back handspring? So that's a tumbling move where a gymnast takes off from 1 or 2 feet, jumps backward onto the hands, and then lands back on their feet.
So then what is a back aerial? An aerial is a gymnastics movement tumbling skill that is performed without the hands ever touching the ground or the beam. You take off from 1 or both feet and then land on 1 or both of your feet. In a simple way, this is basically a cartwheel without ever using your hands. Here is a video of what our physics and biomechanics are going to go over today. As you can see, the gymnast took off with 2 feet for the back handspring, landed on both feet, and then took off from 1, and then landed on both of her feet for the aerial. We're now going to talk about what our 3 important biomechanical components are of this move. We're going to be talking about friction, ground reaction force, and the transfer of angular momentum.
The first concept we're going to talk to you about is the concept of friction. Static friction is required between the gymnast's hands and feet with the beam to ensure that the hands and feet remain stationary while the force is applied. This static friction force is dependent on the beam's coefficient of friction and the reaction force applied by the gymnast. During takeoff, the friction force must oppose the horizontal component of the force from the gymnast to ensure that she does not slide when propelling herself upward and backward. When the gymnast lands back on the beam, this force must also oppose the force of her landing so that her foot doesn't slide off the beam or backwards on it. Without this, she would likely fall either to the side or just straight back onto the beam.
There's 2 ways that this can be affected. One is through the coefficient of that friction, as well as through the reaction force that she applies to the beam. Now, originally these were an issue because beams were made of a fibrous material or a wood that had a lower static friction coefficient. But now gymnasts perform on a leather or suede beam and also use chalk on their hands, feet, as well as the beam to help absorb moisture that would normally reduce that coefficient. Now here's a quick video to show what happens when that coefficient of friction is overcome.
Testing, 1, 2. This is Gavin. Over.
There is also a ground reaction force at landing. When landing, if the gymnast's legs are straight and come down on the beam, it will cause there to be a very short time of contact between their feet and the beam. If impulse is held constant, this means that the force will increase very high because the mass of the gymnast and the velocity they come down at does not change. This high force into the gymnast's legs could cause microfractures or larger injuries to her lower extremities. Now, when coming down, if the gymnast is to bend their legs, they will increase the time of contact between their feet and the beam, which will decrease the amount of force putting into their body and help them from causing any injuries to themselves.
The last concept that we're going to talk about is the transfer of angular momentum. So momentum is conserved through the aerial flipping portion of the movement, but this momentum originally is generated through the back handspring portion. So when you watch the movement, you'll see that her legs and her upper body very obviously move at different speeds. But why this is happening is because of that conservation of momentum. That momentum is transferred between body segments. So first the upper body will move, then the legs. So let me talk you through that step by step. So originally, moving from her feet out of the back handspring, her upper body will propel backwards until about parallel. Then at that point, her head will remain about relatively constant, and her legs will gain the momentum to be rotated over the head. Once they fully rotate around, then her leg will make contact with the ground again, and the momentum will be transferred back to the upper body, allowing her to stand upright. So here's a quick depiction of that movement step by step. As you can see, once she leans all the way forward and her back and head are about parallel to the ground, then it maintains that point in the third and the fourth frames. Then once her leg is back on the ground, you can see that her upper body transitions to the upright position while her legs remain stationary.
So here's our video once again, and we're going to talk through those steps that we just went through. As you can see, the gymnast needed friction throughout the jumping phase as well as the landing phase of both moves with the back handspring and the aerial. With the ground reaction force, the gymnast was able to have the perfect amount to where she did not over-rotate or under-rotate, and she bent her knees slightly on the landing so that she did not have too much force going into her lower extremities. Finally, angular momentum was conserved throughout the aerial movement as her back and head moved first, keeping her head constant, her legs flipped over her head, and once her legs made contact with the beam, her head went backwards and she was able to stand up fully straight without breaking any physics laws. Here is our bibliography and citations from all of our research.
Thank you. We hope you now understand a little bit more about the biomechanical concepts involved in a back handspring transitioning to an aerial on a balance beam. Have a happy holidays.